Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out to another session of the House Committee on Finance. We welcome you from within the State House, a few that may be in the room with us now, and from your homes. And we are going to get started. Clerk, could I get you to call the roll, please, for an attendance?
Certainly. Chairman Abney.
Present.
Vice Chair Slater. Vice Chair Mazurkowski.
Present.
Representative Amore. Representative Baginski.
Present.
Representative Barrows. Representative Baginski. Representative Edwards.
Here.
Representative Hull.
Yes, sir.
Representative Nadone. Representative O'Brien. Representative Quattrucci. Representative Ruggiero.
I am here.
Representative Tabone. Here. Representative Velo Wilkinson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The next thing I'm going to do is ask that we hold Bill 6170 for further study. Can I get a motion on that, please?
So moved, Chairman.
Chairwoman Giraldo says we motion to hold Bill 6170 for further study, and Rep. Diaz seconds it. Would you call the roll, please?
Of course. Chairman Abney.
Yes.
Vice Chair Slater. Vice Chair Mazurkowski.
Yes.
Representative Amore. Representative Baginski.
Yes.
Representative Barrows. Yes. Representative Diaz.
Yes.
Representative Edwards.
Yes.
Representative Hull.
Yes.
Representative Nadone. Representative O'Brien. Representative Quattrucci. Representative Ruggiero.
Aye.
Representative Tabone. Yes. Representative Velo Wilkinson.
Yes.
Okay, all set.
Okay, thank you very much. So Bill 6170 will be held for further study. And as I usually say, because I get this all of the time, what does that mean? It just simply means that a bill is being held to, listen to testimony, get other facts, get other opinions before it comes out in any kind of final form. So holding for further study does not necessarily mean that your bill has been killed and that you'll never see it again. But we do work on many bills after we leave the hearing room. Tonight we're going to have Sharon and her staff give us more briefings. We're in a part of our Finance Committee meetings now where we do a few bills, and we try to marry those up with budget articles that are close to them. So tonight we're going to have Sharon give us a view of several articles. Then we will have the administration as usual to help us with questions that we may have after we finish asking Sharon questions. And remember, as she gives her presentation, sometimes it's pretty complex. If there's something you need to ask her, even as she's going through, she doesn't mind answering that specific question. But then we will have the administration come up and further clarify some of the questions that you may have. And usually Director Warmer will have a team of individuals who will help us with that. And then after that, we have a bill that we will actually, Bill 6170 by Chairwoman McEntee, we will have her speak on that if she wishes, and then we will go into our telephone calls from our guests who are waiting online. So that's kind of the schedule of what we will do. I do ask our telephone guests to please remember that we have a lot of information already, but we want you to be heard, but we want it to be as concise and as brief as possible. The same thing with the questions that we ask our own fiscal staff and those of the administration to make sure we get the salient points of what we need to know to craft good legislations. But if you have a long dissertation or something, you can certainly send that to us. We do read them, and so you have two bites at the apple, as we used to say. You have verbal testimony and you have written testimony, so your voices will be heard. But we do ask that everyone stay on task, because we've got a long way to go with this, and keep your questions pointed to what we're discussing and what you need to know for your constituents. So with that, Sharon, please.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. We'll jump right into the several items that are before you this evening. The governor's budget submitted to you split the revised budget into a distinct bill, and that's contained in House Bill 6121, and the spending plan for FY22 is in House Bill 6122. So the articles tonight cover both pieces of legislation, and we will take them one at a time. The budget stabilization reserve and cash stabilization fund is, you heard a lot about in the last couple of months as the state used some of that money to balance the 2020 budget. But just as a reminder, this rainy day fund was set up to ensure there were adequate cash and budget reserves approved by voter referendum 1992. The state spending is limited to 97% of the general revenues coming in. The rest of that gets diverted into a rainy day fund, and originally that was 98%. When that rainy day fund reaches 5%, any excess flows into the capital account. You know that as the Rhode Island Capital Plan Fund. This was amended to ensure that money was only used for capital projects that used to be able to be used for debt service. So we looked at this picture here when we did the governor's budget briefing overall, but just a reminder, these are the funds that are programmed through the Rhode Island Capital Plan Fund. And the funds have been used over the years to lower the state's borrowing needs, and in taking the $120 million from the rainy day fund in 2020, that interrupted the normal flow of resources into the RICAP fund, because the money that flows into RICAP is excess above the rainy day minimum. If you take the rainy day fund, it takes a while to refill that first, and then the flow is interrupted. So, just as a reminder, what you use that money for, over 25% of it is used for higher ed, nearly a third for transportation, and the rest helps protect state assets. In the budget adopted in December for fiscal 21, $90 million of the 120 was paid back, and that left $30 million to be paid back as part of the fiscal 22 budget. However, the budget provided to you, only pays back $7.5 million in the current year, and then $42.5 million in 22, and leaves $70 million to be paid back in fiscal 23. As we talked to you when we were talking about the governor's budget overall, this was part of a strategy to provide surplus funds to help solve the deficit for 2022. And just as a reminder, the fiscal year 21 as one of the moves in the fiscal 21 budget. This helps leave a surplus of $265 million that gets used in fiscal 22 to balance that budget. So the proposal before you delays that payback. Moving on to Article 2 of the supplemental budget. As we mentioned before, and as you're well aware, there have been 6 federal acts to address the financial crisis and health crisis affecting the country. And the most recent 2 were in December and March. Back in a year ago, March, the CARES Act established the Paycheck Protection Program, which offered forgivable no-cost loans for staff and operating costs to retain employee counts. And that is up to $100,000 per employee. That loan is forgiven if 60% of the total is spent on staffing and other requirements are met. You may remember also that this funding was quickly exhausted and then recapitalized a year ago. According to data from the Small Business Administration as of the end of March, almost 30,000 loans were provided in Rhode Island for a total of $2.7 billion at an average of $93,000 per loan, $94,000 per loan. When the CARES Act passed, there was a provision in there that the forgiven loans would not be treated as income for tax purposes. Usually, such a forgiven loan would be treated as income. And also under usual situations, any expenditures paid from tax-exempt income is not deductible for tax purposes. At the end of December, what's known as the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was the federal budget plus another stimulus, expressly allowed for deductibility of those expenditures if they were paid from forgiven PPP loans. So this was a change in what had been law in March. So now, under federal law, loan recipients are exempt from federal taxation on both the loan amount and the expenditures supported by the loan. Rhode Island tax rules follow the federal rules in this case. At the time this was adopted, the state had already enacted its budget based on revenues that were estimated without this in mind. And after this passed, the state estimated that it could face a loss of about $133 million over 2 years from the amounts that were previously estimated before this law change. That loss is summarized in the slide here. It crosses business corporation taxes and personal income taxes and fiscal years, as you see, for the total of $133 million. What Article 2 of the supplemental budget does is it partially decouples Rhode Island from the federal tax treatment of forgiven PPP loans. And so this will impact business corporations, bank, and personal income taxes. The forgiven amounts of $150,000 and under would be exempt from taxation. So the idea is to include forgiven amounts above that as taxable. And so the estimate is that this would recapture about $68 million of otherwise lost revenue over the 2 years, as shown in this table, in the taxes spread over business corporation and personal income. And just for businesses file through both taxes, depending on how they're structured. So that's why business taxes show up in both personal income as well as business corporation. So some of the data, and we didn't get to this level of detail during the initial budget briefing, but from the Office of Revenue Analysis, is that about 2,250 businesses with PPP loan amounts above $150,000 would be taxed under this. The vast majority of the loan amounts are for businesses who got loans of under $600,000. But here are some of the ranges that the 2,200 breaks out into. So from a low of 1,800 of them, somewhere between 150 and 600,000, to a high of somewhere between 6 and 10 million for a handful of businesses. So how would this translate into a cost to businesses or someone who got a loan? Looking at it in increments, revenue analysis also provided us with this example. I would caution at this point also that as we've asked people to do estimates of this, they're working on data that's, incomplete, but also, is relying on certain assumptions, and the further you get through those assumptions, these are all just estimates based on data we have and how this may fall. So this is how it might look and how it looks using all the estimates that are in play here. So you can see that in terms of someone who got a forgiven loan, maybe out of that 2,200 or so, maybe 160 of them will pay an average tax of $242. That's how you would read this. There would be at the highest level, the tax could be average of about $360,000 for those who got the most money, smaller number. We tried to put this a little more visual for you because sometimes the numbers overwhelm a little bit, but out of the 30,000 in loans, Article 2 applies to about 2,200 of them. So that's the blue circle are those that would not be affected by this change. On the money side, though, most of the money was given to a smaller number of loans, so it's applicable to a little over 40% of the money, but less than 8% of loan recipients. And then just to kind of combine the two thoughts about the impact onto current law of the federal change after the fact, and then the partial decoupling, clawing back some of that. the state still would see about $66 million reduction in estimated revenues, even if this is adopted. So just a quick kind of comments about why this is an issue and how it's not always easy to compare other states. All states conform differently to federal tax code. There's different terms for what kind of conformity you have, whether it's rolling or automatic. And it's very common for states to conform to certain parts of the federal tax code but decouple from others. So every time a federal tax law change occurs, a state has to look and say, does that apply to us? Is that the starting point for our item? And so states are in different groups. So in this case, Rhode Island conforms to federal tax law changes in cases where we're already coupled. So we're already coupled to the federal definitions of business net income. So when the federal government changes that definition, Rhode Island is conformed to that and is affected unless it takes a proactive action to decouple. Because that business net income is a component of both federal adjusted gross income and taxable income. And just to complicate things further, depending on whether you file a personal income tax or corporate tax, there's different starting points from your federal definitions. But the bottom line here is the state is currently coupled to this definition, and so any changes the federal government makes affects how the state calculates its revenue. And therefore, you would need a law change to not count this, to count this, because under current law it would be counted now. In terms of what other states are doing, with the major caveat that every state is different, the tax foundation information we got was that 33 states in the District of Columbia are currently following the federal treatment, but that includes states that may have pending proposals such as Rhode Island, but it also includes states that proactively went and exempted theirs when they weren't otherwise conformed to the federal government. So each state is taking their own approach to this. States that want to do something about taxing PPP loans can treat forgiven loans as taxable income, which is partially what's being proposed here. They could disallow that deduction for expenses, which was the piece adopted in December, or they could do both, and there are examples of states doing all of those things. People always ask about what Massachusetts and Connecticut do. Connecticut follows the feds and exempts both. Our information from the Tax Foundation is that Massachusetts excludes forgiven PPP loans from taxable income for corporate, but not under individual income, and that again has to do with conformity rules. So, very clear. So there's also some additional language in Article 2 relating to some other tax types, nursing facility providers and hospital license fee. It does appear geared to make sure that if these are otherwise, if forgiven loans would otherwise be included in these calculations, this would need to apply as well. I think we're not totally sure that that's what happens, but this would just be in case they wanted to ensure there was the same treatment. And then there's a provision in the article that empowers the Division of Taxation to reverse the proposal by excluding the income if this law were adopted, saying that if the federal government allocates funds to the state for purpose of revenue replacement based on revenue estimates in any given year. I will leave it to the administration to explain that. I think it's a signal that this is something they might consider changing even if it gets adopted, but it's incomplete as drafted in terms of exactly how that would work. So if you're ready, I'm going to move on from the PPP section to a provision in 6122, Article 1, Section 18, dealing with extension of previous bond authorizations. You may remember that in 2014, the voters approved a $35 million mass transit hub infrastructure project to fund enhancements and renovations to mass transit hub infrastructure throughout Rhode Island. And over the last several years, there have been a number of developments and delays that I will recap for you here on the use of this money. And in fact, presentations from the fiscal staff on the DOT budget and this topic have included some of the information I'm showing you here, but I'm really just kind of putting it all in one place so you can see what we've seen as it's gone around. Back in June 2016, there was a request for qualifications, and 4 proposals were issued back in 2016. Then in March of 2017, there was talk about an RFP going out and something would be awarded in 2017. Then in March of 2018, we were told the project was in a draft RFP stage. August 2018, there was some pre-development agreement, and then design work was going to begin in January of 2019. March 2019, they were in the procurement process. July of 2019, there was a request for proposals that was ultimately canceled, pending work with RIPTA and other stakeholders. In 2020, we were told DOT canceled that. And then in 21, there was a design consultant selected to advertise for construction in the fall and start in the spring. Since the bond was approved, about $1.2 million of the $35 million has been spent through fiscal 21 on preparing RFPs and other legal expenses. Why is this important? Well, after 7 years, unissued bonds automatically extinguish if you do not act to extend them. So when you ask the voters to approve something, there's another law that says that, you know, if these bonds aren't issued in a 7-year period, you have to get a special action to extend them. And so what Section 18 before you does is extends the unissued amount, which totals $20 million. So some of it was issued, it just hasn't been used. There's an unissued amount of $20 million that would get extended through June 30th, 2023. The governor's capital budget programs these funds for use in 2023 and 2024. And then finally, there's a section of Article 6 that would eliminate the $10 fee for sales tax permits. You may know that under current law, retailers are subject to a $10 fee for their permit to collect and remit sales tax. This article repeals that. It does maintain the application requirement, and the tax administrator is allowed to administer that. And the budget assumes a loss of about $300,000, assuming roughly 33,000 retailers. If this sounds familiar, you did hear a bill, House Bill 5214, early March on this, and then the governor has in the past submitted a couple of different proposals, either repealing or making it subject to the tax administrator's discretion, but the proposal before you today is a simple repeal. Happy to try and answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. You have, okay, great. Chairwoman Ruggiero, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Sharon. So going to slide 25, if I'm understanding this correctly, the governor is asking 2,200 small businesses to pay a tax on the Paycheck Protection Program, which was a lifeline for these small businesses, to pay utilities, rent, and keep people employed. And then on our, page 25, you're saying this article will then empower the division to reverse the proposal. So, I mean, it's $66 million to the state, but 2,200 small businesses, it just seems like we're hammering them after they've endured a pandemic. And then the division is going to change their mind if they can use federal dollars. Is that how I'm understanding this? That the purpose of the revenue replacement for the state, so they could actually change their mind?
Those are the words that are put in the article. It's a little bit different.
It's very
we've seen
different.
Before.
So, Mr. Chairman, will somebody from the Division of Taxation be here? Because I really don't think it's fair for Sharon, but this is a bit of a quandary.
When we finish the questions for Sharon, then we go to the administration.
So there is somebody.
Yeah, it looks like on my note there will be somebody that can ask that question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. I want to go to Floor Manager Edwards next, and then Rep. Baginski.
Thank you, Chairman. On slide 16, you're showing, well, it looks like a very large disparity between 22 and 21. Is there a particular reason for that? I mean, is it 21 because it's already in, we're not going to be able to go back retroactively and get the money, or what's the problem here with that one?
So this is, I would say, purely a function of fiscal and calendar years not lining up, right? So remember that your tax year 2020 began on January 2020, but you were already halfway through 21 when that happened.
Okay.
And then I believe, and I'm certain that taxation folks will fine tune this explanation, but it also has to do with the event is the forgivable loan. That's, so you may have gotten the loan, but when it's forgiven is when you receive the money as forgiven. So it's a function of both the splits on the fiscal year and the tax year, and then also the year in which the loan was forgiven.
So for all intents and purposes, the majority of the money is going to come from 22.
No, this is when the state would receive it. The money is going to come from 20 and 21 because that's money that was given out. So I don't want to confuse when the money went to folks with when the taxes would be due, because that would be the difference.
Okay.
Right, because the money went out beginning in March of 2020. And there was a re-up in the December bill as well, but the bulk of the money, and I think I've got something on that. Yeah, so the loan year, most of the money went out in fiscal 2020, but if it wasn't forgiven until 21, that's not when it's income, until 21.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Quite welcome. Rep. Baginski, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Sharon. Slide 15, you lost me a little bit. Can you repeat or just refresh me on the timeline? I'm curious about the assumptions the state made and when. Can you just repeat that?
Sure, yeah. The CARES Act was March of 2020, and in establishing the PPP program, the federal government said forgiven loans will not be taxed. They had to say that because if they wanted that to happen, because under current law and all normal treatment of forgiven loans, this is a taxable item. So that happened. The state went through its budget process, May, November, revenues come in, people make payments based on what they think they owe. The state estimates its money, passed a budget. Short time after that, the federal government said, oh, we're going to add a tax benefit that ends up flowing through to the state on the deductibility side, which is why there's a recognition of a loss.
Yes, that was in the fall.
Sorry.
Didn't that guidance come out in the fall from the IRS, and then it was reversed in December?
So the guidance from the IRS concluded that these funds could not be deducted, and it was Congress that reversed that at the end of December.
Okay.
Had to pass a law to override that.
Got it. And that's when the state changed its position?
So just to remind everybody, the state is conforming to the federal government unless it passes a law not to. And right now you're hearing a proposal for it to not do that.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. Chairwoman Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between my two colleagues, Ruggiero and, but I can't say her last name, Baginski. They answered my question because I was thinking about if at the time people signed for the PPE loan, they were aware of that they may pay taxes. And that was the part I was very concerned related to your question, because if they were not, aware of that, so then it would be another situation. But now after she referring to the time when was considering to adding tax requirement taxes. So I understand now better. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. That's what we're here for. Got Rep. Nardone. I think Rep. Barros is hiding you. I was trying to see. I'm sorry.
I know it's tough. I'm not in the lion's den over there.
Okay.
But Sharon, on slide 19, you have your little graph, and it says that 2,242 businesses would be affected. Is there any breakdown of these businesses, like how many are in the restaurant industry, how many are in the hospitality, how many are in the gym industry? Or
I do not have that. I imagine that the data released by the Small Business Administration has that. It certainly has names of recipients because, for example, we know that nursing homes got 40 million in loans. We know that some charter schools got loans. So, you know, there's names. I don't know that it's been sorted by business type, but it's out there.
Okay, because my concern, I know Chairwoman McEntee is putting a bill in, is that a lot of businesses that took the PP3 loans didn't actually need them. Whenever you have the federal government subsidizing payroll, a lot of people line up for those subsidies. So it would be nice to have a breakdown of the people that actually needed the money and those who did not. And that would be, for instance, in finance. If you were a financial advisor, you actually got a raise because the influx of money actually driven the price of assets in the stock market up, and they get paid on commission. So not only will they be getting a raise, they will be getting a loan, and then they be getting tax forgiveness on that. So that would be my concern with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Great question. Any other questions before we go to the administration at this point? Okay, what happens next then is that we've invited the administration here, and I think today Acting Director Jim Thorson is in charge of the whole crew, and I'll get him up in a moment. And he has quite a few people with him that may be able to answer some of those questions. What I normally do is ask that if he has prepared remarks, if he wants to make a few remarks initially, to try to answer as many questions as possible, but if not, then there are others who can. And if you don't feel like your question was answered before, you can remember them and then ask them directly, and that way we'll close out the loop of the answers before we get to the bill. So, Jim, you have your crew. I know you're there, and as usual, if you...
Excuse me, Chairman?
Yeah, great. Yeah, and if you want to make a statement before, that's fine. You know, answering a few questions. If not, you've got a bunch of experts there who've heard, I think, the questions that my panelists are asking. So we can start with that.
Excuse me, Chairman. It's Rep. O'Brien.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Rep. O'Brien.
I'd just like to be recognized as present, please.
Okay, Mr. Clerk, you're done. We've got you. Thank you for calling in.
I would also serve Bob Quattrochi.
Okay, Rep. Quattrochi also.
Rep. Slater, also Chairman.
Everybody's popping up on my screen now. Okay, great. We've got a full house almost. Okay, Jim, I think that's the end of that, so you can start your process, please.
Thank you, Chairman Abney and members of the committee. With me this evening are Nina Savage, the tax administrator for the state, as well as Paul Dion, who is the chief of the Office of Revenue Analysis. We've also got Lauren Doyle and Stephen Soderlund from the Department of Transportation, in case you have any questions from DOT, but also with me from the Budget Office is Joe Cadiga, who I think many of you know. So as Sharon summarized last spring, the coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, or CARES Act, created the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, and then in December declared the PPP loans to be tax-exempt income for federal tax purposes. And in the FY22 budget proposal, the governor proposes to decouple or separate from the federal tax treatment of the PPP loan forgiveness and treat those loans as taxable income for forgiven PPP loan amounts in excess of $150,000. Qualified expenses paid with PPP loans can still be deducted from other taxable income in tax years 20 and 21. Now, if the General Assembly passes Article 2 of the budget proposal, the FY21 impact would increase revenues by $3.6 million, and the expected revenue increase for FY22 would be approximately $64 million. However, if no action is taken and all PPP loans are forgiven and expenses paid with the first and second round of loans are deducted against other taxable income, the negative impact on Rhode Island's revenues could exceed $130 million across tax years 20 and 21. So a month ago, when Governor McKee introduced his FY22 budget proposal, the federal government unveiled the American Recovery Plan Act, ARP or ARPA, some are calling it, And still today, we don't have clear direction from the federal government in deciphering the specific parameters of how to efficiently use this stimulus money. When you add this onto the structural deficit the state faces, we are in dire need of a revenue source of this magnitude. So the federal tax treatment of PPP forgiveness is inconsistent with the historical federal precedents considered when Rhode Island has tied its tax code to the federal provisions, primarily because debt forgiveness is typically considered taxable at the federal and state levels. We believe it would be unfair to offer double benefits to large PPP loan beneficiaries when recipients of other forms of relief have not been offered the same tax benefits. Recipients of many other forms of pandemic relief, whether they be grants or unemployment benefits, they must either report their relief as income or are not allowed to deduct the expenses paid with that money from their taxable income. And as Sharon reflected, this proposal only affects a small percentage of companies who benefited from PPP loans of greater than $150,000. So based on the data from current PPP applicants, which is pretty dynamic, the Office of Revenue Analysis estimates that fewer than 1% of for-profit businesses with PPP loans forgiven would be impacted by this provision in tax year 20, and fewer than 15% in 21. It's only the largest loan takers and the largest businesses. Those businesses would still be able to deduct their qualifying expenses paid for with PPP loans, so they're still getting a tax break. It's just not as large as it otherwise would be. Rhode Island does not tax the income of nonprofits unless they generate unrelated business income that would be subject to taxation, and as such, most nonprofit businesses would not be impacted by this proposal. Now, we understand that decisions of this magnitude require hearings like this to ask questions and deliver answers, and we hope to answer those questions tonight. But if there are questions that need additional follow-up, Joe and Nina, Paul and I will get together and answer these questions for you and follow up very quickly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jim. Now, there were members who had specific questions that they asked earlier. I think this is probably a time just to ask the other experts who are there so that you can have that part of what you're looking for answered. Okay, I'll start with Rep. Tabone.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, so thank you. And I want to start off by saying when we say that a small amount will be affected, the bottom line is they will be affected. And in one particular case, I have a constituent who has a quote-unquote successful trucking company that grosses a lot, but trucks are extremely expensive to maintain. And as the economy was shutting down, I personally know that they were using their personal income or their savings to keep their people going in anticipation of these PPP loans. Now, they received almost $1 million, and they're an S-Corp, that now that would be their personal income, and they have nothing to show for it because it all went out to their employees. And so what do we do in that situation when a company no longer has that money because it went for the purpose of paying for employees?
Well, the fact is that you don't pay taxes if you don't make money under this program. So you don't pay taxes. Again, if you don't make money, you're not paying taxes.
But they're showing almost $1 million in revenue, and they were keeping. So as the economy was shutting down, and I can get more specifics later on, because I'm sure that this is something that I'm going to have to work with them on. But the level of the amount of work that they were getting was lessened dramatically, and so all this did was create a bridge. And so it might show income, but it's going to fall on on the owners, which again, they're an S corp, so it goes through their personal income. So I mean, this and many other things are concerning me because at the end of the day, as my colleague Representative Ruggiero mentioned earlier, companies needed these things, and a lot of these companies don't have the money now. They're going to have to get loans to pay back the loan.
Well, the situation is that people who didn't take loans pay the taxes. So it doesn't seem fair that the people who got the loans get a double tax break.
But it's not. I think that some people were trying to be prudent and didn't take something that they were eligible for. And there are those who took it who needed it in order to not close their doors, as we've seen so many who have. So I understand prudence, but we can't punish those who were trying to survive. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Chairwoman Ruggiero, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Director Thorson, and thank you, Nina and Paul, who are in the wings. I appreciate all your answers when I call you and email you. So, Director Thorson, I understand what you're saying about the equity issue, that people who had unemployment paid taxes, but we are whacking 2,200 small businesses in our state because the governor is proposing to decouple taxable income. The feds said it was a forgivable loan. So that is very concerning, I mean, the whole article. But I'd like to ask you about the part of it that it seems so nebulous, that if the federal government allocates funds for the purpose of revenue replacement, then Division of Taxation is empowered to basically reverse their decision. Are you anticipating something happening to the feds? And what why not use, if we can, some of the $2 billion coming into the state to offset this particular revenue?
Yeah, I think that the governor said that in his budget transmittal letter, that he would like to have that in reserve. But you must remember that the budget was delivered on virtually, I think, the same day that the ARP passed. And it's still not clear to this day, almost a month later, when we will be getting it. I've been told that it won't be for at least another month, if not longer, in terms of guidance from the feds as to whether that money can be applied for revenue replacement.
Well, we certainly should know in the next 30 to 60 days, and this is going to be a 3-month process by the time we pass this budget. So I just think it's really important to make sure we take care of the businesses. As it's been said, this program, the PPP, was a lifeline for people to stay in business, keep employees working, our friends and neighbors, and it's, we just can't be hitting the businesses again, especially knowing that billions are coming into the state. So I thank you very much for all you do, and I appreciate you answering my questions. Thank you, Chairman.
You are quite welcome. Do you have one, Chairwoman Diaz, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to follow up Rep. Ruggiero question and concern. Also, I would like to request if you have, or you can provide us, or I would like you provide us the list of those small business that took a loan with a perception that would be something that we don't have to worry about it. And I want to use my district as an example. I'm representing big portion of Broad Street with a lot of small businesses like barbershop, bodega, which is a little convenience market, beauty salon, and other type of mop and pop business. They were through the difficult time we already know about the COVID, and now they're facing another situation with the taxes. And I would like to know if you can provide us the list of those small business, how the new proposal we affecting those small business and how much, because I have to educate, but we advocating as well. Rep. Ruggiero is doing that. We need to do something about it. We cannot surprise them during the process of recovering. So if the state have the best intention to help those small business, we have to think about that twice. So thank you.
So, thank you, Rep. The list of loan recipients is on the SBA website, and I think we can probably get that downloaded for you. Paul, can we do that?
I know how to download it, Director. Thank you so much.
No,
I don't referring to
I'm
that.
sorry, Rep.
I just referring to there is a specific low, very low small business that are going through this. And I know your department is able to produce that list without me to go to the link in the website. So thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Rep. I'm sorry. What I mean is that the website has the data, but in terms of putting it into a format that's more easily digestible, that's what I was asking if we could do.
Okay.
We could do that, Jim.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there a
that's not
particular
problem.
cutoff, Representative Diaz, that you would like to see for a loan amount?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
He was asking you, yeah.
Keep in
Yes,
mind
I would
that
like
there's,
to. I would like to because my experience showed me that many small business apply and qualify for less than $20,000-$30,000, and those
Yeah.
are the one I'm concerned the most. Those are.
okay, thank you.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because it's a good question, that Chairwoman, you're talking about the complete list and not just your district, or just
Yes.
your district.
You are absolutely right, Chairman. Sorry, it's a joke between us.
okay.
You are absolutely right, Chairman, because I'm not want to look like I'm a selfish, only talking about District 11. I know many of my colleagues also experience the same thing. So those lists have to be included, category or amount of loan that they were granted. But I'm talking specifically those little ones that we all representing around the state. So it's not just District 11, it's low income, a small business as well, others.
Great. I just wanted to make sure that the respondents knew exactly what you needed or what you wanted. Okay, great. Okay, are there any other questions of the ones on staff at this point? Want to make sure, check my screen. Some of my colleagues are not here. Okay, then what we will do now, in this case, if there are no other questions that I can see from that. I'm sorry. Yeah, Okay, I got you. Okay, great. Okay, so we do have other items on the agenda. But just a second. Hold on. Okay, thank you. We're just making sure that everybody on the administrative staff had a chance to make any comments, that they wanted to. And I can understand a little bit of the confusion. There are other people who are here from the administration that we want to make sure you have an opportunity to make comments if you want to, particularly those from DOT. We've got a list of Nina Pauldleon, Joseph Cadega, Lauren Dahl, and Stephen Sunderland. And so, did anybody else on your team, sir, Jim, want to make a comment?
No.
We don't
No,
want to
Mr.
leave
Chairman.
anybody out.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. So that's all he has. All right. So if there are no further questions from the committee on that part, then we will bring in Chairwoman McEntee. She has a bill that she would like to speak on.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to stick around until later, or?
Yeah, just in case, if you would.
Yeah, I will do that.
We're navigating some waters here. Want to make sure everybody has a chance to see and be heard.
Happy to stay.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's fine. You're there now. Okay, so. That's all right. You good where you are now. We're kind of reconfigured in our little classroom here, and so we're getting it straight. But Chairwoman McEntee has Bill 6170. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I liked all of your conversation. It directly relates to the bill that I put in, House Bill 6170. The bill speaks for itself. It's a one-liner. It basically exempts the PPP loans from taxation. This is a direct result of the governor's recent proposal in the budget that allows for anyone who received over $150,000 in the PPP loans that they would be taxed by Rhode Island. And as the chairwoman of small business, I have received multiple calls, emails. I've visited with restaurants and businesses around the state. Obviously, many of my own constituents get me right in because they know exactly where to find me. And they have suffered, as we all know. They did not save, most of them, and when we're talking about restaurants especially, they did not save money from these PPP loans. The first round of money, they were told, spend 75% on your employees, and the other 25% spend it on your business to try and keep your doors open and keep yourself afloat until we get through this mess. And many, back in March, people were shut down completely. So they had no revenue. There was no revenue coming in. Expenses are piling up. So I guess I don't understand what we're really talking about when we say, okay, we gave them this money, now we're going to tax them on it. Most of them suffered financially hardship, a great hardship all year. And I'm not seeing anybody getting rich on this. And I heard one of our colleagues say that, some people took the money and didn't need it. I'm not aware of those people. I don't know who they are. I know that they had to show a loss. I sat with far too many grown men and women who run businesses in tears over the year, and I'm sure many of you have done the same. So to now tell these people who were told to spend that money, you got to spend it or you got to pay it back. That's what they were told. Now we're going to tell them you got to pay taxes on it. When the federal government forgave the loans and the taxes on it, I think we should follow suit. And I implore this committee and Governor McKee, who is very much a small business advocate, his small businesses that was so happy that he became governor are not happy with this. And he must be hearing what I'm hearing. And you all must be hearing what I'm hearing. So if they didn't save the money, that means they now have to earn the money to pay these taxes. And if you go to let's take restaurants, and I hope I don't prolong this, but I have to spell out what's going on. You go into a restaurant, and we're so used to going in lately, nobody's there, right? When we used to go a year ago before the pandemic, you knew the restaurants that were busy and that weren't busy. Now you go into some of them, like I'm going to say the Coast Guard House. I was there the other night, and I met with Bob Leonard down in Narragansett. I'm sure you all know the place. Great place. And I said, oh, it looks great. You're doing business again. You must be at 75% capacity. He said, I absolutely am not. All our tables are 6 to 10 feet apart, whatever the rule is right now. You're just used to seeing it this way. This is not how we used to do business. So they're not even really they're getting to 75% capacity on the inside with the distance of each table. That used to be a totally different setup. So where you used to have 4 tables in front of a window, you now have 2 or maybe you have 3, depending on how much area you have. So you've already taken out a lot of your seats. So now to now say you got to pay taxes on all this money, and I'm not, the Coast Guard House does very well, so I'm not saying them necessarily, but I've met with several of them that are not making the money back yet. They're relying on the summer. They're relying on the weather, and hopefully a lot of the constraints that we're operating under will be lifted. But we also have to be safe, and I'm very cognizant of that, as I know all of you are. So until we are back in 100% capacity, which I don't see it coming anytime soon, because I think people aren't going to want to go inside as much as they used to. So we have a new normal that we have to deal with. And I would ask this committee, with all due respect, and the governor, please do not tax the 2,000, what did I hear? 2,240, was that it? I'm asking you not to do that. I think we can find it elsewhere, especially with the new bundle of money that we should be getting in. I'm hoping we can find it there. But I leave it to you experts in this room.
Okay.
But thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. Are there any questions for the Chairwoman before she's relieved of that? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Right behind you, Rep. Nardone has. He's got you covered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairwoman, I just wanted to say that don't be, how do I say, make my comment, take my content out of context. I am for this bill for restaurants, hospitality, and small businesses that needed this money. I don't believe they should be taxed. My comment was directed towards people that took the money that may not have needed it. If there was a way of amending the bill or something of that nature to maybe, filter those out, that was it. But as far as this bill goes, I would definitely vote for the bill. I would sacrifice the few to save the many. Okay, thanks.
If
Oh,
I
thank
could
you very much.
respond,
That's
Mr. Chairman?
no.
No?
What we
Okay.
don't do is go back and forth with that. Yeah, I mean, both have made a good point. Okay, thank you so much. All right. No further questions of the witness at that point. So now what we're going to do, we're going to our phone lines, and I just want to say one more time that the people on the phone are witnesses. It's very important. Remember, we get hundreds of pieces of documents from individuals that send them to us. We get them, we do read them. The witnesses online have a much shorter time because we try to get to everyone. So if you would please state, your name, the position that you're in, and which article or which bill you're voting on, and why you want to vote on it. I mean, why you support it or why you do not. That would help us in determining some public comment. So we'll go to the phones first, and I think the first person up, is it George? Good afternoon, George. How are you?
Good. This is Kevin Durfee from George's. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Hanging in. Okay, you let us hear what you need to say in a few short minutes, sir. Please.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Representative McEntee, for allowing me a few minutes to speak. I just wanted to put some simple numbers together to easily show how it makes no sense to tax PPP. Last year, small businesses received a shot in the arm with much-needed loan to help pay for critical expenses and keep their employees on the payroll while they were sent home due to the closures. We were told by the SBA to pay our employees even if they were to stay home. So if a typical business received a $100,000 PPP loan, they were required to spend at least $75,000 on payroll to be able to use the other $25,000 on utilities, rent, etc. Existentially important help during a mandated closure. But what if they needed less because they barely had any employees? Say they borrowed only $50,000 of the $100,000. They'd only have $25,000 or $12,500 available for rent. They most likely needed more than that. So it behooved us all to spend the entire amount of the loan to be able to max out what we could use for real expenses, even if it meant we had to frivolously waste a large chunk of money on labor that we weren't using. No business person in their right mind would pay thousands of dollars to people not to work, but this was exactly what we all had to do. We paid hazard pay, bonuses, etc., and this will most likely be the case this year. So as I understand it, if I were to be taxed on $100,000 by the IRS, I'd pay about $30,000 in taxes. So the only amount of money that I really needed to save my business was $25,000 for the mortgage. So how fair is it to use $25,000 but have to pay the government $30,000? That's like the government saying, sorry, we have to close you down, but here's some help. Write us a check for $5,000. You're welcome. The state taxing the PPP would be similarly hurtful. So there was a reason why the federal government granted these loans. Congress considered taxing the PPP, but quickly reversed their stance. I hope the state does as well. This bill is probably the most important measure that our state government can do to help save more businesses from closing. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. 2021 may turn out to be a better year, but there is no way it's going to make up for last year's losses. It may take years to recover. Well, thank you again, Representative McEntee, for all that you do for small business, and I urge every other representative to support this critically important bill.
And thank you for your comments, sir. We appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Sure. Next caller. Good afternoon, George. You're on the line, sir.
All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, you can begin with your brief comments.
All right, appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. But first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill, 6170, which I'm strongly in support of. Just to give a little background, I operate a large restaurant here in South County, which normally employs over 100 people. Like many businesses, and certainly all restaurants last March, we were forced to close our regular operations basically overnight. Although we weren't prepared for this, we managed to get the curbside dining option up and running. But even at its best, over 80% of our normal sales went away. What didn't go away, however, was our rent, our tax payments, our utility bills, our vendor bills, and a multitude of other normal operating expenses. We had to pay expenses that were accrued while we were fully operational with funds from a severely restricted revenue stream, which caused a tremendous cash burn for our business. We seriously considered just shutting down because we couldn't do anywhere near the amount of revenue needed to cover our expenses. When the PPP funds became available, they were the only thing that allowed us to stay open. If we wanted to survive, we had no choice but to accept the funding. We utilized the fund to keep as many staff as we could on the payroll and to pay any of the additional allowed expenses under the government terms. We all did this, however, under the explicit pretense that these funds would be tax-free to use. The governor now wants to tax these funds a year later, and it's quite frankly an outrage. My industry not only is still heavily restricted, but was heavily reliant on the PPP funds to stay afloat. Therefore, the burden we would suffer would be heavy for an already decimated industry. The hope was this year restrictions would continue to ease, allowing us to start getting back to normal. The fact is, many businesses still carrying unpaid expenses from the shutdown. So they're trying to pay those off while also having to pay current bills with a still restricted cash flow. Having to pay this totally unexpected tax would devastate many businesses because it would have to come out of current operating cash flow, unfortunately making it impossible for many to stay open. Is that the goal, to force businesses to close in order to collect tax revenue now, but to lose future tax revenue forever? Businesses are going to be forced to make a choice of whom to pay: the state, their vendors, their employees. If you can't pay your employees or your vendors, how can you operate? And I don't know if this has been considered, but if you don't pay the state, are you then subject to the penalties and fines on the tax owed that no one anticipated? I don't see how anyone can think this is fair. The state received billions of dollars from the federal government with the explicit intent to replace the lost revenue to fund its operations. I don't recall any city, town, agency, organization having to pay any fees. Why is the business community, one of the hardest hit groups affected by the pandemic, the only group being subjected to a potential tax? It's going to take a long time for many businesses to get back on their feet, and some, unfortunately, may never be able to. The PPP funds were meant as a lifeline to these businesses to try and help them survive the unprecedented time we find ourselves in. Pushing through this tax would be an unfair, unnecessary, and undue burden on each and every business trying to survive, and certainly push back and delay any economic recovery we desperately need. Therefore, I am strongly urging your favorable consideration on this bill and not tax the PPP funds. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, George, for your time. We appreciate it, sir.
All right, thank you.
Okay. I think Sarah is next, I believe. Sarah Bradco, you're on the line.
Thank Thank you very much. My name is Sarah Bracco, here on behalf of the Rhode Island Hospitality Association in opposition to the proposal to tax the PPP, and I do want to thank Chairwoman McEntee for introducing 6170, which we are in full support of. I also want to note that over 100 hospitality businesses have submitted a petition to the committee tonight protesting this tax, and it has become one of the top issues we are hearing about from our industry because of the number of our members that will be impacted. As you've heard, the PPP was designed to keep small businesses, keep their employees on their payroll. And this money was a lifeline for them, particularly restaurants. And now the state wants to tax that lifeline. It's a very unusual and frustrating step because this is such a reversal of long-standing tax policy, and it's at the expense of our small businesses. Even more frustrating is that the majority of states are moving in the exact opposite direction. Just this past weekend, Governor Baker signed a law that exempts PPP loans. So once again, we will be out of step with our neighboring states. And after years of Rhode Island trying to become more business-friendly, this is the worst possible time to reverse that course. Further complicating this is that it's retroactive, and many businesses have already filed their they're scrambling because they don't know how to advise their clients on the best way to proceed, particularly because so many of these businesses simply don't have the cash on hand to pay this surprise tax. We also know that a significant number of our members are going to who may not meet the $150,000 threshold in 2020 are absolutely going to meet it in 2021 due to the timing of their loan forgiveness. One very alarming element of this proposal is a provision that it gives the discretion to tax Rhode Island small businesses to the state's tax administrator, not the General Assembly. Under this language, if the state gets additional revenue from the feds, which it did, the tax administrator alone gets to decide whether or not to implement this tax. And not only is this a very interesting constitutional question about whose job it is to set law in Rhode Island, it also creates more uncertainty for businesses because even if the General Assembly does pass this proposal, we still don't know what our tax liability is going to be. Our industry did not choose to get shut down, but we have done our best to keep our heads afloat despite the unimaginable hardship that continues to face us, and we're just asking that the state doesn't penalize us for accepting help when it was offered. I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Sarah. We appreciate your comments. Okay. Number 4. Tamara McKinney?
Yes.
Okay, you're on the line, please. This is Chairman Abney at House Finance. We were ready for your brief comments.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Tamara McKinney. I am the owner of Abney Brewing Company located in Warwick. I am opposed to this bill. I am a believer in paying my fair share of taxes, but I must be allowed to make money in order to pay my taxes. My business has been shut down for more than 1 year or under some level of restriction. Given table spacing, our revenue, we are unable, until we have warm weather and can use outside patio, we are unable to turn a profit because of the restrictions put on us by the state of Rhode Island. So I feel like it is grossly unfair to be given, having been given a lifeline by the federal government to keep my doors open, which we did, to then be taxed by the state of Rhode Island on that until the state of Rhode Island will take the restrictions off of our business so that we can get back to business. So, anyway, thank you for your time, and that's the only comment I needed to make.
Well, thank you for your important comments. They are important to us. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Okay, we're waiting for Norman. Norman LeBlanc?
Yes, speaking.
Good. This is Chairman Abney from House Finance. You're on for your brief comments, sir.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. What I want to say is, first of all, I'm a CPA with KLR in Providence, and And making after-the-fact tax changes is contrary to good public policy. Additionally, retroactive tax changes are contradictory to the Constitution, and they fail under challenge. Massachusetts lost the Peterson decision, where Mass had changed the capital gain rate retroactively and then lost at trial. And the state refunded countless millions to the point where they actually had to spread it out over a 4-year period because it was such a strain on their budget. So in our case, taxpayers have had no ability to plan a budget for Rhode Island after the fact tax change. The events have already occurred, and many of them a year ago. There was no opportunity to make estimated payments or pay balances due on PPP loans because it was unknown at the time of the payments that more would be due. So on top of that, Rhode Island will charge 18% interest on the late payments. And all the while, the taxpayer was fully compliant at the time the original tax was remitted. That's shameful. And one has to ask, how is the $150,000 threshold even determined? It sounds discretionary. Was a consideration given for industry type? For example, travel is still in dire straits. Size doesn't really matter for them. And was any consideration given for future or what the future holds? Every day we hear about new strains, surges, struggles with the vaccinations. We don't know what 21 or 22 is going to look like. And is now really the time to invoke an unexpected cash burden on businesses that are just starting to catch their breath? The federal rescue plan provided Rhode Island over $1 billion directly to the state treasury, plus $100 million for capital projects, plus $600 million for higher ed and kindergarten through 12th grade. All that was justified by offsetting of lost tax revenue. So if we're being honest with ourselves, is taxing the PPP just being opportunistic?
Okay, thank you for your comments. We appreciate that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you for the time. Bye-bye.
Okay, I think we have Christopher on the line.
Hi, Chairman Abney, members of the committee. I want to thank you for allowing me the time to speak on this very important issue to small businesses. My name is Christopher Carlozzi. I'm the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, and in Rhode Island we represent hundreds of businesses, all types of industries, manufacturing, retail, wholesale, service, agriculture. The business is heavily impacted by the pandemic. And we strongly urge this committee to reject the proposal to tax paycheck protection loans. To put it into perspective, last spring when the pandemic began, small businesses were ordered to shut their doors, restrict their operation to combat the virus's spread. And for these businesses, that meant little to no revenue coming in. So business owners were sitting there worried, how would they meet payroll, pay the rent, keep up with utilities? And then the Paycheck Protection Program came along, and it was intended to help those small businesses stay above water. It was meant to prevent permanent closures. It was meant to keep those workers attached to their jobs to prevent layoffs, which could overwhelm the unemployment system in the state if nothing was done. And it wasn't easy for them to get those loans. You probably remember the struggle that many of the smaller employers faced trying to get the loans in the first round, and many it took till the second round of loans before they actually obtained them. So businesses were promised that the loans would become grants if they played by the rules. That meant using more than half of the loan money for payroll. The rest could be used for rent, utilities. As long as those parameters were met, those loans would be fully forgiven, and that's what many business owners felt. The federal government ensured the loans would not face federal taxes. And up until a few weeks ago, most Rhode Island business owners anticipated that their loans wouldn't face state taxes either. And it wasn't until this proposal came along that businesses learned that loans over $150,000 would be taxed as the state aims to decouple from federal tax policy. But these businesses have used every last cent of the funds to keep workers in their jobs and the lights on in their shops. And quite frankly, this proposal is patently unfair for struggling businesses. Businesses like you heard on the line earlier. Businesses that did everything the state asked during the course of the pandemic, despite the negative fiscal consequences. Manufacturers pivoted to make PPE when asked. Restaurants adapted to outdoor dining. Retailers increased their online presence. They fought to survive. And they played by the state's rules. And now the state's aiming to change the rules of the game when it comes to these very funds that were designed to help them during, I would argue, the most difficult year of many of their existences. So Rhode Island is moving in the wrong direction here. And what Sharon may not have known is that last week, Governor Charlie Baker signed a law to ensure no PPP loans would be taxed in Massachusetts, a state that had partial tax conformity. And I will add that both the Massachusetts House and Senate voted unanimously to support the proposal to help small businesses. And also Maine's Governor, Janet Mills, worked with the Maine House and Senate to devise a similar plan which would ensure the loans are not taxed for Maine businesses. So while most states are attempting to provide relief at this vital point for small businesses, this proposal would punish them. And the PPP loan program was widely utilized. In fact, 72% of NFIB members surveyed nationally reported receiving a loan in 2020, and about another 70 have sought forgiveness at this point. Another 42% of those surveyed said they'll seek a second loan in 2021. These loans are meant to save small businesses that make up every main street in the state and were never intended to serve as a revenue source for the state of Rhode Island. We strongly urge you to make sure small businesses do not face taxes on the PPP loans. And I would add that we are surely supportive of Chairwoman McEntee's bill to prevent these loans from being taxed. And I can't say how much I appreciate, on behalf of my members, her comments this evening. So with that, I would certainly open it to any questions.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate that. You're doing a great job for those that you serve. Thank you. Okay, we have Jesse on the line yet? Coming up. Hi, Jesse. This is Chairman Abney, House Finance. We're ready for your brief comment, sir. Hello, Jesse.
Hi, my name is Jesse Morrow, and I'm a resident of Providence, Rhode Island. Thank you for giving me the time to provide testimony today. I am calling to support the amendment to line 6 of Article 1, Section 18 of the state budget by adding the following two sentences. Per the 2014 bond referendum question, funds may only be utilized to fund enhancements and renovations to transit hub infrastructures. Therefore, no bonds may be utilized to dismantle or otherwise deconstruct the state's primary transit hub in Kennedy Plaza. And I think this is important because our public transportation is truly an asset for all of Rhode Island and its citizens, especially those that are without the means for their own private transportation. I think a society should be judged by how it treats its most neediest and those who are lacking the means for basic necessities of life, housing, transportation, and I believe public transportation is a human right that we can provide to everyone in the 21st century. Our buses are integral to that vision, and I really hope that the state legislature can consider the 2014 bond referendum as the go-ahead for improvements to the Kennedy Bus Plaza, for improving our public infrastructure and not dismantling it. So again, I'm calling in support of the amendment to the House budget, which states that the 2014 bond referendum shall be used to fund enhancements and renovations, but not to dismantle or deconstruct the bus hub in Kennedy Plaza. Thank you for your time, and thank you for taking our testimony.
Thank you for your comments. We really appreciate that, Jesse. Okay. We're waiting for John. Sorry. John?
Yes.
Okay, this is Chairman Abney. You're on House Finance. We're ready for your brief comments, sir.
Thank you very much. So good evening, members of the House Finance Committee. My name is John Flaherty. I'm Deputy Director of GrowSmart Rhode Island. I'm here this evening with you to express support for the purpose of Article 1, Section 18, to extend the termination date of the 2014 mass transit bond, but with a very important amendment. Back in 2014, and I know it's hard to believe we're coming up on 7 years of no progress on this bond, but back in 2014, 60% of Rhode Islanders voted to pass this $35 million bond to improve the vital role of mass transit across Rhode Island. Our concern is that there is the potential that bond funds may be used in a way that brings harm to the transit system and to the thousands of Rhode Islanders who rely on it to get to work and to school and to go about their daily lives. This would happen if RIDOT is allowed to use the bond funds to dismantle and deconstruct a primary transit hub in downtown Providence, where commuters today can make efficient and convenient transfers to their final destination. This isn't just controversial with transit riders like myself, but with multiple community organizations. And in fact, the Providence City Council unanimously passed a resolution of opposition to this very controversial proposal. We believe there are viable alternatives that have been publicly vetted, and I really want to emphasize that we're not against any change at all. However, it's vital that when voters support bond referenda, that they have trust and confidence that the bonds will actually be used for their stated purposes. And that's why we proposed a two-sentence amendment that Jesse just referred to be inserted into line 6 as follows. Per the 2014 Mass Transit Hub Infrastructure Bond ballot question, funds shall only be utilized to support enhancements and renovations to transit hub infrastructures, and therefore no bond funds shall be utilized to dismantle or otherwise deconstruct the state's primary transit hub in downtown Providence. I thank you for your public service and for your thoughtful consideration of this proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful information. We appreciate that. Okay, looks like we have two more guests. Is this Jacqueline?
Yes, this is she.
Yeah, this is Chairman Abney, House Finance Committee. We're ready for your brief comments, please.
Great, thank you so much. So my name is Jacqueline Goldman, and I am a Providence resident and a bus rider. And so, I'm not necessarily for or against the Article 1, Section 18, but I would really like to be able to add language to make sure that that money is only used for improving the bus and not really used for the dismantling of Kennedy Plaza. When you look at the original text of the bond, it's very much about bus infrastructure and stuff like that. And the fact is that, the bus is already hard enough to navigate as it is. Adding more hubs and breaking apart the central hub will not help that. And if anything, we need to make sure that there's infrastructure there for riders, even things like bathrooms and stuff like that, that have been closed all year. So I would just like that as the budget is being reviewed, that we consider making sure that the language in the budget makes sure that the money for the bus is only used for the bus and not used for the dismantling of Kennedy Plaza. And that's really all I have to say, is someone who relies on the bus to get to work every day. And I know that a lot of other people do too.
Well, I think you presented yourself well, and you said a lot. Thank you for your comments. That's always helpful to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the time and for taking time to hear people about state budgets.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
I think we have our last caller, I believe. Okay, I think we got David.
Yeah, that's right.
Good, how you doing, David? This is Chairman Abney of House Finance. You're on for your brief comments, please, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee for taking the time today to hear comments. My name is David Mann. I live in House District 11, and I'm calling to urge you, as several other callers have, to adopt the amendment proposed by the Rhode Island Transit Riders to Article 1, Section 17, to clarify that funds approved in 2014 for mass transit hubs should not be used to dismantle Kennedy Plaza. This amendment would help to ensure that those funds are going to be spent the way that was promised. Voters, when we voted, we approved a measure that would fund enhancements and renovations to transit infrastructure, and unfortunately, RIDOT made plans behind closed doors to use that money to dismantle Kennedy Plaza and to break up the bus berths among a number of locations that would be less efficient for riders. This plan wasn't made with any public input, and countless community groups have spoken out against it, and RIDA has been very unresponsive to that community input. This situation really, the central issue I'd like the committee to consider here is that this situation really threatens to undermine voters' trust in future bond measures. When we vote for a bond, we have a reasonable expectation that the bond funds will be spent as described on the ballot. When we vote to improve transit infrastructure, we have a reasonable expectation that transit infrastructure will actually be improved and not dismantled. So by clarifying that these transit bond measures cannot be used to dismantle Kennedy Plaza would be a great opportunity for the committee to send a message that our state government respects the will of the voters. This amendment will prevent those bond funds from being wasted. It'll ensure that we'll actually spend them on sorely needed transit improvements, and it'll help repair trust with voters. So with all that in mind, I really urge all of you members of the committee to adopt this amendment. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your input, David. We really appreciate that. Okay, I think that exhausts the telephone list that we have this afternoon, and I want to thank all of you who did call in. It's always helpful to get the public input. Thank the technical staff for making all this happen, and certainly my teammates here in the Finance Committee. That should end the business of the Finance Committee tonight. Thank you.